Good day, Junior Tuckies, and welcome to this video on a preparation of some exam practice questions that you might see when it comes to the heart, circulation, and the skeleton. We're going to jump right into a couple of these. Please be sure to check out our other videos on this section to get a better understanding of the content moving forward. So, I love to tell my students that before we attempt any question that includes an image is 1, we look at the diagram first. 2, we try and make sense of the diagram before we read the questions. In doing it this way around, it's going to help us identify the structures a little bit better when we have to use the questions. And secondly, we'll be able to answer our questions a lot more quickly. And then at the end of it all, save a little bit of time when we complete our exam. So looking at this diagram over here, we can break it up into 2 sections. We can, or actually 3 different sections. Structures G and D are identifying chambers of the heart. And here we can see G an atria and D a ventricle. We can look at structures H, A, B, and C, and we have them identifying blood vessels. Structures F and E, here we have musculature of the heart. So these 2 labels are going to identify either the muscles of the right ventricle or the left ventricle. Right, now we've got a better understanding of what we're looking at, and now we are ready to attempt the questions that await us. Right, so now we can see the bigger picture. First question. Identify the heart chambers labeled G and D. And here we need to be a little bit more specific in answering this question. It's worth 2 marks, so we need to be sure of what we are writing. 2.1.1, G, we're looking at the right atrium, and D, the left ventricle. Not to confuse the right with the left-hand side. Keep in mind that when you're looking at a heart, it's as if the heart is looking at you. So it is the heart's right-hand side and it is the heart's left-hand side that we are referring to. 2.1.2, here it says to us, write down the letter only of an artery that carries A, oxygenated blood, and B, deoxygenated blood. So by now we will know that arteries carry blood away from the heart, and these are going to be the blood vessels that are leaving the ventricles. So looking at these, we can find A carries oxygenated blood because we know the aorta carries blood to the systemic circulation from the heart. So oxygenated blood will be carried by artery A. And deoxygenated blood is going to be carrying blood to the lungs. And here we're talking particularly about the pulmonary arteries, which are identified by label B. 2.1.3. Explain why the walls of E and F differ in thickness. E and F are the walls of the ventricles. So, in comparing these 2, we need to make sure we are identifying what the structure is forming in the heart. So looking at 2.1.3, structure F is the wall of the right ventricle. They are less thick because they are pumping into a much smaller circulation. It's the pulmonary circulation. And if we look at E, it's the muscular walls of the left ventricle, and these walls are a lot thicker and stronger because they're pumping blood into the larger systemic circulation. 2.1.4, explain what will happen if the coronary arteries that go to the muscles of the heart become blocked due to high cholesterol in the bloodstream. Now, if they're coronary arteries, they're carrying blood away from the heart, and if they're carrying blood away from the heart into that systemic circulation, we're looking at oxygen-rich blood. So if they become blocked, oxygen-rich blood will not be able to reach the muscles of the heart. If we don't have oxygen reaching the muscles of the heart, that means the heart muscle cannot respire, cannot undergo cellular respiration and produce energy, will not be able to contract properly. So this muscle tissue will be inhibited. It's going to be muscle tissue that will probably end up dying because of a lack of oxygen, and this person would then suffer a heart attack. Now, this is worth 3 marks, so let's have a look at where we could possibly have gotten our marks in our explanation. So the first thing is to identify that the oxygen would not be able to reach the muscles. Secondly, cellular respiration will not occur. With cellular respiration not occurring, the muscles would not be able to contract, and therefore this person would suffer a heart attack. Let's look at another type of question. This one not so much dealing with the heart, but here we're looking at the skeletal system. Here we can see that the structures that are being identified here, A and B, refer to muscles. We're looking at structure X is a tendon, so it's a connective tissue attaching muscle to bone. And we can see that we've got labels F, C, D, and E, which are identifying specific bones in what is the arm. So, V and Z, we're looking at joints. Question 1 says, label muscles A and B and bones C, E, and F. And I've labeled A and B as the bicep and the tricep. And in trying to identify the bones C, E, and F, how do we know that C is the ulna? Remember, in one of the previous videos we spoke about how do we differentiate between the radius and the ulna when looking at the forearm. Firstly, we got to find the thumb. And on the side of the thumb is the radius. If we look at label C, it's identifying the bone on the opposite side. Therefore, C would be the ulna. If we look at E, this is the shoulder blade, but we don't write down the shoulder blade. It's not specific enough. We need to make sure we refer to it by the scientific name. Here we're talking about the scapula. And F then would be the radius if C is the ulna. Let's look at some of the other questions as part of this larger question. Describe the function of part X when the arm is bent at the elbow. Now, part X, here we're looking at the tendon. So let's look at the role of the tendon for the arm to be bent. So here we're talking about X being the tendon. It's going to attach the bicep to the radius. When the bicep contracts, it's the tendon's job to pull the radius towards the ulna, therefore flexing the elbow joint. 3.3.3, how does the movement at joint Y differ from that at Z? Well, Y is a ball and socket joint. It's movement in many planes. And Z is a hinge joint, which is movement in one plane only. What is osteoporosis and how is it caused? Well, osteoporosis is where the bones become very weak and brittle, and it's usually caused by a lack or a low calcium uptake into the bones. Some other lifestyle factors may also be to blame here. So in other words, somebody that's not physically active enough would cause the bones to become a little bit less strong. Somebody who's more active would generally have stronger bones. If we look at the next question over there, name the joint found at V. That's a gliding joint. And now we dive straight into question 3.3.5. Draw and label a typical synovial joint, and I've done that for you here. We can see that there are bones on either side of this joint. Each bone has a articulating cartilage surface, which is labeled there as well. The synovial joint is surrounded by a capsule and a synovial membrane, which produces a synovial fluid, which lines this cavity and causes ease of movement, almost like a lubrication to the two surfaces of that joint. Right, this brings us to the end of this video on a couple of practice exam questions. These are very, very few. Be sure to have a look at some of the other resources on the Junior Tukkies online platform for some fantastic resources to help you prepare for your life sciences exams. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.